Okay, let's just get right into it. Today, we're settling a massive debate that's been raging in the TypeScript ecosystem. We're looking at the ultimate 2026 heavyweight title fight between two absolutely phenomenal object relational mapping tools. In one corner, we've got Prisma, the undisputed, established champion of developer experience, and in the other, Drizzle ORM, the incredibly fast, lightweight, and SQL-native challenger. In this explainer, we're going to break down exactly how they stack up across performance, schema design, and modern serverless deployments.
We've structured this explainer as 6 distinct rounds. We'll hit the 2026 ORM landscape, schema definition styles, the query API experience, serverless and edge deployments, real-world database migrations, and wrap up with which should you choose. Let's go! Round 1, the 2026 ORM landscape. Okay, let's dive into this first section and see exactly where we stand right now. The Node ecosystem has matured a ton. We've largely moved past older, heavier tools like TypeORM and SQLize, and everyone's really migrating towards solutions that offer just flawless TypeScript inference.
Now, Prisma is still the reigning market leader, pulling in around 5 million weekly downloads. For a lot of teams, it's just the default choice. But look at Drizzle, sitting at about 2 million downloads. And the crazy part? It grew a staggering 400% over the last year. It is rapidly gaining ground, and that's largely because it solves some very specific architectural pain points that we're going to get into right now.
Round 2, schema definition styles. Moving right along, let's look at how these tools actually differ at their foundation, how you design your database schema before you even fetch a single row of data.
So here is the fundamental philosophical difference. Prisma is schema-first. You write your models in this custom.prisma file, which is its own domain-specific language. And it's beautifully clean to read, sure, but you absolutely have to run a Prisma generate step every single time you change it just to update your TypeScript types. Drizzle, on the flip side, is totally code-first. You define your schema using plain old JavaScript objects right there in TypeScript. No generation step required. The types update instantly the second you hit save, which, honestly, developers note is a massive boost to daily coding happiness.
And this brilliantly illustrates Drizzle's core philosophy. If you know SQL, you know Drizzle. They aren't trying to magically hide the database from you. Instead, they want to give you rock-solid type safety right over those raw database concepts. It's basically a super thin, highly transparent layer over your tables.
Round 3, the query API experience. Okay, so how do you actually interact with your data? How do you fetch it, insert it, update it? Once again, we see a pretty massive divergence in API design between the two.
And this brings us right to a notorious performance killer, the N+1 query problem. Prisma uses an object-based abstraction, right? So when you want related data, you literally just use the include keyword, and Prisma automatically batches all those queries under the hood to completely protect you from N+1 bottlenecks. It's super smooth. Drizzle, though, gives you a query builder that maps almost one-to-one with actual SQL. So if you want related data, you have to write those explicit optimized joins yourself. Basically, Prisma is way easier to teach to a team that maybe isn't super strong with SQL. But Drizzle gives you the exact granular control you need to perfectly optimize a really complex query.
Round 4, serverless and edge deployments. All right, let's step into the absolute most dramatic battleground of 2026, deploying these RMs out to edge and serverless environments like AWS Lambda or Cloudflare workers. To really understand the stakes here, I want you to picture this real-world production scar. A team was running a standard AWS Lambda and RDS proxy stack, and out of nowhere, they saw simple 200-millisecond queries spiking up to 16 seconds. 16 seconds! Their database was totally fine. Their API was completely healthy. So, what on earth happened? Well, it turns out the culprit was the underlying wire protocol itself. You see, back in Prisma version 5, they used this incredibly heavy Rust query engine that defaulted to the binary protocol for everything. Every single database call was a prepared statement. So during peak hours, it was literally penning up to 870 connections on their RDS proxy and completely starving the system. It was wild. The fix? Prisma actually had to fundamentally change its architecture. By Prisma 7, they completely dropped that Rust engine in favor of pure TypeScript driver adapters. This let developers use the standard text protocol and stop that dreaded connection pinning entirely.
And that architectural shift completely flipped the script on bundle sizes. Prisma 6 was dragging around a massive 14-megabyte footprint because of that Rust binary. Prisma 7 struck back hard, shrinking all the way down to just 1.6 megabytes. Huge improvement, right? But compare that to Drizzle.
Drizzle is microscopically small. We're talking just 12 kilobytes with absolutely zero external dependencies. Now, what's really interesting about this difference all comes down to 200 milliseconds. If you're pushing code out to Vercel Edge or AWS Lambda, and your cold starts absolutely must be under that 200 millisecond threshold, Drizzle's tiny 12 kilobyte footprint is an overwhelming advantage. I mean, Prisma has improved vastly with version 7, sure, but Drizzle is just edge native by design.
Round 5, Real-World Database Migrations. Okay, it's one thing to design a beautiful schema locally, but it's an entirely different beast to safely modify a massive production database without taking everything offline.
Now, both of these ORMs are great at generating plain SQL migrations that you can review, but I've got a vital warning from the trenches for you. So the crucial point is this: when you're using DrizzleKit, if you don't explicitly enable strict mode, a simple column rename might actually be interpreted by the engine as a command to drop the existing column entirely and then add a brand new one. Seriously, blindly trusting generated SQL without strict mode is a fantastic way to accidentally delete production data and completely ruin your weekend. Always review the generated SQL.
And neither ORM magically prevents database locking on massive tables either. If you're dealing with, say, a 10 million row Postgres table, you absolutely must follow strict zero downtime practices. First, never backfill all your rows in one giant update. Use batch chunks. Second, always use the concurrently keyword when creating indexes to avoid those nasty access exclusive locks that basically paralyze your database. And third, never drop a column that your active application code is still referencing. You have to manually manage these steps, regardless of which ORM you choose. Round 6. Which should you choose? All right, we have covered a ton of ground today. So moving into our final section, which of these incredible tools should you actually choose for your next big project? Let's break down a really pragmatic framework.
Look, neither ORM is objectively better in a vacuum. They just serve very different needs. The choice ultimately boils down to 4 major factors: your specific deployment environment, how critical tiny bundle sizes are to you, your need for instant type inference, and honestly, your team's overall background and comfort level with raw SQL.
Specifically, you should go with Prisma if your team prefers a nice layer of abstraction and generally writes very few raw SQL queries. If your team leans heavily front-end or maybe comes from a Ruby on Rails background, the Prisma mental model is going to click instantly. Plus, its out-of-the-box tooling, like Prisma Studio for visually browsing your data, is incredibly polished, making it the indisputable champion for rapid prototyping.
On the flip side, you definitely want to choose Drizzle if your deployment targets are edge runtimes, like Cloudflare workers, where those tiny bundle sizes are just non-negotiable. It's also the clear winner if your team has a strong back-end background, writes raw queries regularly, and demands absolute maximum control and visibility over the exact SQL that's hitting your database. In high-throughput environments, Drizzle's performance is just exceptional.
Which leaves us with this final, vital question. What level of database abstraction do you truly need to trust your stack today? Do you want the ergonomic, incredibly smooth safety net of Prisma, or the high-performance, close-to-the-metal transparency of Drizzle? The good news is, they're both totally production-ready. Just evaluate your team's SQL fluency, double-check your deployment constraints, and you really can't go wrong. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and happy coding!